Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we talk about really what goes on inside our head all day, every day, right? And what I'm talking about there is those thoughts that we have that run 24/7. And those thoughts are what shape our reality. So each week I like to bring you guests that help us dig into a relevant topic as it relates to our way of thinking, with the goal of coming out on the other side with new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of looking at what might feel like something normal in your life. But hopefully what we talk about today will give you a new perspective so you can move on and live the life that you're meant to live. And joining me today is a friend of the show, Alex Martin. Alex has been on the show before. I want to welcome you back. I'm so happy you're here.
And thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be back. Thanks.
Yeah. So today, we're going to talk about communication, and we've got three really big points here: communicating in ways that other people can hear, conflict resolution, and pathways to redemption.
Yeah.
So Alex, you want to introduce yourself before we get started?
Well, sure. My name is Alex Martin. Hey, how you doing? I am a videographer and communicator by trade. I'm currently employed as a sort of a project manager for a software development company. That's not really relevant to this, so we don't have to go into that. But what I do most of the time, most of my days, is listen to people and talk to people. And I do a lot of translating from sort of user speak to text speak to client speak to tools speak. So languages, English languages, technical languages, computer languages are like, I'm in there all day. That's what I do. So
yes, I can relate to that because I do the same.
Yeah.
I've done the same for a long time. So, and even if you're not a technical person, I think the topic of communication is something that can benefit anyone. So if better communication interests you, if you're looking for improved ways to handle conflict resolution, stay tuned to this episode because I really think there's something for everyone today.
Yeah. You know, you talk about how communication can be good for you. And I'm just going to get right into it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I feel like when a lot of people say I'm a great communicator, what they're really saying is I speak well. And I think a lot of people fail or maybe just don't put enough emphasis on the listening part.
Yeah.
But there's really 4 parts to communication. I mean, there's probably a lot, but just 4 that I'm thinking of. So there's being able to articulate your ideas well.
Right.
So that they appear in the mind of the person you're talking to, right? That's what being a good communicator kind of means to most of us. Hearing the other person so that their ideas are clearly communicated back to you.
Right.
But then also making sure that that other person hears what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which I think is a subtle difference. And sometimes you have to adjust the way you speak to make sure that they are perceiving you the way you intend to be perceived. And also listening to people the way that they're communicating rather than the way you might have said something or what you might be expecting them to be saying. So it's 2 types of two-way streets, you know, both on the communicating and the listening side. I feel like you have to be not only good at it on the output, but good at it on the input as well.
Yes. And, you know, talking back on the type of work that we do, that's very similar. One of the best compliments I ever got was somebody told me that I speak to hear what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
And so often, probably everybody listening can recognize when you know that person who talks and they pause, but they're not hearing what you're saying. All they're doing is waiting for themselves to be able to speak.
It's their turn again.
Right. And they're so like ready for their next sentence or whatever they want to get out. They're not listening to what you say. Super frustrating, super annoying. There's very little, I think, valuable communication in that way. Yeah. And so having that ability to see it both ways and be able to adjust, because that adjustment is important too, because not everybody communicates in the same way. Not everybody.
Absolutely.
And often we sometimes will overlay what we think we heard on top of what somebody said.
Right. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah. If, you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I'll stop in the middle of what I'm saying and I'll go, does that make sense? That's like almost, you know, like a punctuation mark for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I'm checking, I'm giving them air to like sort of ask questions or do follow-ups. Sometimes I'll even ask if I'm not seeing what it looks like recognition. I'm like, could you repeat that back to me?
Yeah.
Like in your own words?
Yes.
You know, and I can I get a little backstory on this?
Sure, go for it.
I really I've been doing this for a long time, but it really became aware of it very recently. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have heard of the 5 love languages, right?
Yes.
So I was having a conversation with somebody a couple of years back about this, and they're like, "Oh, the 5 love." I've never heard of it at the time. So we did the exercise, and I'm like, "Oh, interesting." So not only is it important to understand how I communicate, but also to understand that it's different from the way the other person communicates. In like those ways I talked about earlier. Let's say that I'm an acts of service person in the love languages sort of, concept. When I do a thing, hey, let me help you. Let me be there let me support you in your project. To me, that's communicating something. But if that other person is a words of affirmation person, they're not going to hear what I'm saying the way I'm saying it. They're just gonna be like, oh yeah, thanks for the help. They're not hearing the I love you that's behind it, right? Right. They're not hearing it the way that I'm saying it. And likewise, when they're like, giving me words of affirmation, I'm like, yeah, that's great, but let me help you with something,
Right.
So I'm not hearing them say what they're trying to really say with those statements and those words. And that's why I wanted to talk about talking to people in ways that they hear. It's not enough to know, hey, I'm a acts of service guy. I need to also be able to communicate using words of affirmation effectively to that person who expects to hear that. And I need to make sure that when I communicate through acts of service, that they're hearing it. Not say, hey, look at the thing I did for you, but let them know, hey, I do this because, I think you're a great person, and translate it into their, I really love your work. I think you've got a beautiful voice. I really love to see you on stage performing in front of people. And I'm happy when you're successful. That's why I want to help and do these things for you. That's me saying I love you, So it's on me to do that and to like help them do it as well. If maybe I don't know that there is, I don't know, mature in their communication. It's on me to do it, not to expect other people to do it,
Right. And I think that's so interesting. I actually was just talking about this yesterday. One of my old jobs that I had, they used to do this personality testing that placed people in different colors. Right. And the color indicated what your personality type was. So green was very analytical, blue was very emotional, orange was free thinker, didn't want to,
we love to do these kinds of type tests things,
whatever they are, whatever. And so what people would do is they would put that on their signature in their email, or they would put it up in their cubicle or whatever.
Wear a tag.
You knew, right. Basically it was like, you knew what that person was. Okay. And it was only at work though, too, because you have different styles, in your relationships and your family dynamics and your friends and at work. And this was particularly for work, but I did actually find that helpful because in my work, I'm very analytical. I'm very to the point. I'm not I don't usually do a lot of small talk or, but then there's people who are the more that in this situation, they were the blue color. So they were very emotional. So they needed the touchy feely to get started.
And you're like, just get to the point.
Right. And I'm like, why am I wasting my time on this? Right. I don't know. Let's just get to it. Right.
But it's important to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that for me was very eye-opening. And it was a opportunity, I think, to allow myself to get outside of myself and see how other people do things. And that just because I do it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way I do it, but it's not the only way. And
right. There's nothing. Go ahead.
Well, I just think when we're communicating, we're so used to, we're so comfortable with our own communication style that we forget that other people do it different ways.
Right. If I'm a green person in that way of thinking, and I'm a very get to the point, just the facts, ma'am kind of guy, and I'm like, I'm good at communicating. I'm really good at getting to the point and getting to the facts, right? But then I'm talking to somebody with a blue tag on, and they're just like, why are you ignoring my feelings? Why do you not care about the backstory? Why are you interrupting me when I'm trying to tell you why this is important to me? I'm like, well, maybe I'm not as good as communicating as I thought I was.
Right.
But hopefully also they're doing the same thing. They're like trying to express themselves. And they're like, wait, I'm talking to a guy with a green tag. He just wants the facts. Maybe I don't need to tell this emotional story.
Yes.
Did you find that when you were in your personal life, you were wishing you could see those color codes too?
Yes, for sure. And I also found that for me, for many years, because doing project management type work, I mean, I can remember being on projects with other coworkers, and we would actually whiteboard our own personal issues out, right? As if it was a project. And I remember there was a day we sat there and we were like, we were like, as much as we wish our life could be ran by a project, it just simply doesn't work outside of the job, right? No. And then it kind of became a joke. But in that example, what you were saying about the green and blue person potentially working together, it was also interesting for me to realize that I may be really good at getting at the answer, but if I'm swinging elbows and stepping on feet the whole way to get there, I didn't really probably do it in the best possible way, right? Because there's more to it than just getting to the answer or solving the problem.
Right.
And
you got to build relationships. You got to
Exactly.
like communicate with people. It's more than just getting information. It's about that bi-directional connection that you have with people.
Yes. And especially in this, in anything, especially in project work, but I think this goes for anything in life, that people have to feel heard. And often in the type of work I do, a lot of my first meetings with people is just letting them vent, letting them talk at the beginning so they can get it out, because they've never been able to do that before.
Nobody's ever listened to me before.
Exactly.
Thank you for
and
listening.
that's how you build the trust and the, you know, and the confidence, and you actually get what you want. So it's very interesting to think about communication outside of our own minds and start to pay attention in that way, I think.
Well, I've got another little anecdote, and it might lead us into the next topic. I used to work with somebody that was a very close friend of mine. We had been roommates. We were never intimately involved, so to be clear about that. But we had been roommates. We had traveled together. We were very close friends. We socialized a lot, and then we became colleagues as a result of sort of our changing work lives. Which is really great. You know, I'm like, I trust you. There's a strong relationship there. So all the relationship part had already been built. Now we had to learn to work together. So kind of differently than a lot of people do.
Backwards almost. Yeah.
You know, I was an outside contractor to our company, and she would send me an email. This is what we want to do, and we want this stuff, and this is kind of the way we want it to look and how it should work, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, it was just brick wall of text. At the end, it was like, thoughts? ? And I was like, oh, I've got thoughts, you know.
Right.
Are you sure you want to hear and for some reason that really sort of like chapped me. And I didn't know why for the longest time. And it just kind of was a strain on our working relationship. I mean, I'd answer the emails, but it would take me a day or two to get back to them because I'd need to, like, you know,
digest it.
Let my thoughts go before I started to approach the question. And then at one point I realized that I was doing that and that it wasn't good for us, and it was making me not want to talk to her. Right. And so I took her out to dinner as a friend. So I'm like, look, let me take you out to dinner. Let's talk about our work relationship. I want to tell you how to get me to do what you want. This was my approach. And she's like, that sounds amazing. Let's do this. And I told her, look, if you want to activate me, instead of saying blah, 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 blah thoughts, say this. Hey, Alex, if you were going to do this thing, how would you do it?
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you don't get to tell me what your thoughts are. The next paragraph can be that whole thing, right? About the research you've done, your perspective, your expectations, you know, your suggestions for tools or methodologies to use. That's fine. I'm happy to have that. But if you engage my problem solving in the first paragraph, by the time I get to the bottom of that email, I've already got your problem half solved. Or at least a proposal for it. And now we're just talking about go or no go and time and money. Right. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah, try it. You know, so, you know, maybe I could have just sort of, I'll just deal with this and I'll just be cool and I'll just like answer the questions.
Let it go.
But really, but going to her and saying, here's a more effective way to activate me, to get me to do what you want, really, really made a big difference. And it took me a while to figure out why the thoughts thing chapped me, but that's not really relevant. Just going to that other person and giving them the keys. Here's how I can be talked to more effectively, you know? Yeah.
And I'm dealing with a similar situation in my own professional life now with someone who does something very similar, and it's very irritating and it's very, you know, I've been the same. I've tried to figure out what exactly is the problem here.
Why am I irritated by this?
Right. And I think what you're saying, like in the example you're saying, is if someone's coming to me and asking me for advice, then ask me for the advice. Don't tell me all the things and then ask me at the end, like, what's your goal here? What are you trying to get from me?
Right.
And that the way you approach that, having that resolution in such a very easy, lighthearted, like real way is so simple, right? It was so simple, but we often don't do that because we don't want to speak up. It's easier to stay in the shadows. It's easier to stay in the back and complain to your friends or complain to yourself about.
I'll just vent about it. And then the resentment builds up, and then I just kind of avoid that person. And then the problem goes away. No, it doesn't.
Yes. There's something I've been thinking about lately, and I'm actually going to do another show on this about retreating, or that like pulling back when something happens and the fractured results that happened because of that.
Yeah.
And like you're saying in this, you could have kept pulling back until that friendship fractured, and it would have been easy to blame it on a million things. Well, she's this way, or he never reached out to me,
she's
whatever.
Unreasonable. She's irritating.
Right.
I got a better job somewhere else. Yeah.
Right. But the